And to this
just getting the YouTube started here. Just give me 1 second.
Don't worry.
Got to rev up the old internet engines and make sure that the noise is actually, there we go. All right, so I got it all muted. All right, perfect. Well, I would like to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're tuning in live via Zoom, or if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're watching later on YouTube, just want to say welcome. My name is Christian Wynn, and I'm currently the teaching minister and theologian in residence at Colonial Church, a congregational church located just outside the Twin Cities in Edina. This is the Faith and Humanities Forum, and I just want to say a couple words just about the vision of this forum. We have our aim has been to meet about 6 times or so during the year. And part of the background for this is that before I became teaching minister, I was an undergraduate professor for about 13, 14 years. And once I left, one of the things that I noticed that was happening in small colleges and in some universities was that the humanities as a discipline were oftentimes, in some sense, under assault. They were shrinking, they were being defunded, et cetera. So part of the vision here was to find a way to think about how can we support people who are doing work in the humanistic disciplines. And of course, the church, this is a church, and so the Christian tradition, but I would say the Muslim tradition and the Jewish tradition and probably other faith traditions have oftentimes intersected with the humanistic disciplines and have found them to be rewarding and challenging and provocative in very positive ways. So that's kind of the vision here of inviting in compelling speakers with interesting topics to share with us. So welcome, thank you so much for tuning in, and I'm really excited to host you tonight. And I think you're going to really enjoy our presentation. So I'd like to just say a couple of words about our speaker tonight, Art Haecker. Dr. Haecker, I really
Art's good.
He loves art. I'm sorry.
My wife is Dr. Haecker. So
okay, all right. Well, and honestly, I know Art primarily through his wife. She serves at our church and works with our chorale. And so there may be many people here who already know her in that regard. And this is a deeply musically talented family. And we've certainly been enriched by Elise, and I'm really excited to hear from Art today. So let me just say a couple of words about Art. So he is currently the instructor of trombone and euphonium and the director of the Norseman band at St. Olaf College. Before he was at St. Olaf, he held positions in a number of universities and number of educational institutions, East Tennessee State University, Newberry College, and the National Music Conservatory in Amman, Jordan. He holds degrees from the Eastman School of Music, University of Michigan, Winthrop University, and the University of Iowa. His private teachers have included Mark Kellogg, David Jackson, and David Geyer. He has performed with several really eminent musical organizations, symphonies, etc., or orchestras, you might say, I suppose. You can tell that I'm not necessarily a musical expert. My area is theology, so please forgive me. But he has performed with the Amman Symphony Orchestra, the Knoxville Symphony, the Atlanta Pops Orchestra, the Brass Band of Appalachia, which sings to my heart, being from the Appalachian region, and the Illinois Symphony. He's also participated in the Hot Springs Music Festival, the Southern Illinois Music Festival, and the Brevard Music Festival. Tonight, Art is going to speak to us on a key figure. This is really quite fitting given that we are in the midst of Black History Month. He's going to talk to us about Duke Ellington, and the title of his talk is Beyond Category, Duke Ellington and His Sacred Concerts. So without further ado, I think I'll turn it over to you, Art. Welcome, and thank you so much. I know for all of us, we're either snapping or clapping, and we welcome you and are excited to learn from you. So
Thanks.
take it
Yeah,
away.
it's a real joy to be here, and I've been looking forward to this for a while because this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. And I teach jazz history every year at St. Olaf as a summer class, and have taught it in the past at ETSU when I was there. And Duke Ellington is one of my favorite lectures, so it's been really cool to kind of take the whole Duke Ellington lecture and just kind of look at one aspect of this guy's life. So I'm going to do a screen share with everybody because I do have a PowerPoint to go with this, and also we're going to be using YouTube. So my wife will tell you that I'm very technically challenged. So if there's a point where you can't hear what you're supposed to or something, just speak up, and I'll get it fixed. Or my wife is on call in the other room; she can come in and fix the problem. So here we go. All right. So Duke Ellington has often been described as beyond category. And what I want you to do with this lecture is I want you to start thinking about what that means to you as we're kind of talking about him and talking about his career and talking about his music. And specifically, we're going to be talking about his sacred concerts. There were 3 sacred concerts, 3 big ones, and then some smaller ones that were kind of run-out concerts from that, 1965, 68, and 73. The first concert was at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. Ellington was really specific about what it is that he wanted this to be. And he specifically didn't want a jazz mass. And this was a jazz mass was something that was kind of popular at the time in the 60s, as the Catholic Church was starting to kind of loosen their thoughts on music in the church, that people were trying this. And he's like, I don't want that. And I think one of the reasons is that while Ellington was certainly a spiritual person, he was by no means what you would consider a traditional Christian. He smoked, he drank, he caroused, he lived a life that was, shall we say, colorful. But at the same time, his faith was a big part of who he was. So what he wanted to do is really kind of do a work that was sacred, was a tribute to God, but at the same time spoke to all people, and combining elements of jazz, classical music, choral music, spirituals, gospels, blues, and dance. Eventually, he also then recorded these. The recordings were in 1965 and 1968, and it's those recordings that a lot of people now know. And this is probably the sacred concerts, in my opinion, are some of the prime examples of why we would consider his music beyond category. So I think the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to look just at Duke Ellington and get just kind of a brief overview of his career to this point. 1899, 1974, he wrote more than 1,000 compositions. I'm sorry, I spelled that word wrong. The things you see. He elevated the perception of jazz to an art form from what was before either background music or dance music. He really made it into an art form, and he posthumously won the Pulitzer Prize in 1999. So he was born Edward Kennedy Ellington in Washington, D.C. Both of his parents were pianists, were amateur pianists, and he began taking lessons at 7. Music was not his first love. His first love was actually baseball. And he would go and watch the Washington Senators whenever he could, and try to sneak into practices and things. And at the age of 14, he started sneaking into Frank Holliday's pool room. And at the time, this was early in the century, stride piano was becoming a big deal. So a lot of the stride pianists of the day would be playing at places like Frank Holiday's, and he would hear the stride piano. And so his first inclination was that he wanted to be a stride pianist. But as he kind of said himself, that he certainly wasn't a good enough pianist to play that style. And so in 1917, he formed his first band called the Duke's Serenaders, and they played society balls, embassy parties, and they performed for white and black audiences, which was really rare at this time. And it's one of the things about him growing up in Washington, D.C., that kind of afforded him to do this, because he could play at embassies where racial segregation was not an issue, so that it would be okay. So he, early in his career, was playing for mixed audiences, which is something you don't really see from jazz musicians in this period. So he went to New York eventually. He came to New York one time and it didn't work out, and he came back, and eventually he got his big break in 1927, where he became the leader of the house band at the Cotton Club. The gig was originally offered to King Oliver. If you know who King Oliver is, he was the guy who pretty much got Louis Armstrong his start. That he started in New Orleans and met a very young Louis Armstrong, and then King Oliver went to Chicago, and he's the one who brought Louis Armstrong to Chicago to launch that illustrious career. But King Oliver turned the gig down. And the interesting thing about the Cotton Club at this time was we have this real cool kismet of not only Harlem, the Harlem Renaissance and everything that's associated with. So we have artists coming from all over the country, African-American artists that are coming to Harlem to settle, to escape Jim Crow laws. So you have musicians coming from New Orleans, musicians coming from Chicago, musicians coming from all over the place, coming to one location. You also have, around this time, the radio is becoming very popular. And people are starting to have radios in their house. And of course, where there's radio, there needs to be programming. And so they go to a lot of these bigger clubs, and they have live radio broadcasts. And one of the live radio broadcasts was live from the Cotton Club every week. So you had basically two main acts of the Cotton Club. You had Cab Calloway and you had Duke Ellington, and other people that would fill in other nights of the week. So Duke Ellington had a really unique opportunity, that he had a weekly audience that was listening to him from around the country, and really so bolstered his popularity. And also with his gig, he had the freedom to develop what became really his sound. And I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to jump over again. I think I need to, let's see here.
You might need to unshare and then reshare.
Can you guys all see that? Are we
Perfect.
on YouTube now?
It's great. Yeah.
It's good. Okay. So this is a little thing about the Cotton Club. You'll kind of get an idea of it. Christian, tell me if you can hear this when it starts up.
It thrived in the illegal drinking clubs or speakeasies that flourished in the Prohibition era.
The speakeasies did a land office business. Texas Guinan with her gals kept customers roaring.
Duke Ellington was the star turn at Harlem's legendary Cotton Club, a few hundred yards from the Savoy Ballroom. The Cotton Club was owned by British-born gangster Oney Madden, one of New York's most influential and violent citizens.
Jazz has always originated in places that allowed it to nurture. It was always in either in whorehouses, nightclubs that had a lot of drinking, had a lot of dancing, but most of all, places that were run by the rackets, gangsters basically. And they loved jazz musicians because it was happy music that made people feel good. And for some reason, I never knew any jazz musicians that worked in those places that had any trouble with the gangsters at all.
were in the Cotton Club for 5 years. We had a wonderful spot. It was owned by people who were very influential and prestigious with having things accomplished. And the great thing was about it that when the show on, and they did have a wonderful show, no one was allowed to talk. And some guy would start talking, and the waiter would come over, sir, would you please? And then the next thing, he'd go on, and the next thing, the captain would come over, and the next thing, you know, the head waiter would come, and then the next thing, the guy would just disappear.
That, of course, was in the Prohibition era, wouldn't it?
Yes.
By that time, yeah. Did you have any trouble with federal agents or anything like that?
Federal agent? Yeah. No, I didn't. There was never anything left for them to confiscate.
So that's kind of an idea, some neat thoughts about the Cotton Club. So I'm going to play another recording here, and this is a recording of Duke Ellington's band from 1927 at the Cotton Club. And I want you to kind of listen to the sound. This is the sound that you're going to hear is very typical of bands at this time. So like Fletcher Henderson's band that was going on right now, excuse me, Louis Armstrong's Hot Five and such. So we got to hear this very, like I said, it's kind of typical of what's going on. You hear there's a lot of soloists kind of passing back and forth between the soloists. And then you also, you have kind of the chunk that it's going to be actually as a banjo, which at the time was a very popular instrument in jazz. You think about like what maybe like the bass is in a jazz now. At the time, it was more that the banjo was doing that. And you don't have the prevalence of drums that you might hear later. If we jump ahead, and we look at Duke Ellington in the 30s. So Duke Ellington had now been to the Cotton Club for a while. And by 1930, he had developed his sound. And people talk about the sound of Duke Ellington. And what they really mean is that he didn't rely on kind of the typical jazz sound that you just heard. He started to really experiment with what was just possible with the not only the instruments that he had, but with the musicians that he had. And so he started writing specific parts for specific musicians in his band because he knew what they were good at. And he knew that this was the talents that they had. So you're starting to see him just starting to experiment with sound. And this is something that we start to see that elevation from, say, one genre or one art form into another one. And so an example I'm going to show, kind of remember what you have in your head, what we just heard. I'm going to play a little Mood Indigo from 1930. So this is only, a relatively short time later. Listen to the difference in sound. I mean, just the change, just the concept of, first of all, starting with a piano solo that is as complex as you're going to hear in 20th century classical music around the same time, and then going into a section with 2 muted trombones with plunger mutes and a bass clarinet. And the sound is gorgeous and is dark and is sultry. And this is at the same time, if you want to put it in perspective, that Benny Goodman is really starting to kind of do his thing and become popular. This is the time when Count Basie is extremely popular. And so swing is starting to become a big deal. And so when you compare this to what else is kind of going on in the jazz scene, it's a much different sound. And this is kind of the first starts while he's at the Cotton Club in the late 20s and early 30s that you hear this. Another piece we're going to listen to a little bit of that he wrote a little bit later is called Symphony in Black. And it's a piece that's multi-movement, just like if a classical classical orchestra piece that you can think of like a symphony. And it is supposed to depict African American life at this time in the 30s. And it was done for a movie, like a little short film, and we're going to watch a little bit of it. Incidentally, you will see kind of the woman scorned singing in here is a very young Billie Holiday. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know it would do that.
The saddest tale on land or sea was when my man walked out on me.
So the sake of time, we'll move on, but I mean, you kind of are starting to see all these elements. Here he is, he's jumping from venue to venue to venue with different music for every single one, much like you would have in, say, like a classical piece with different movements. You're also seeing like this frame we're looking at right now with this trombone player that's playing with a plunger mute and a pixie mute inside of the bell that you can't see. This particular trombone player, this is what he was expert at. So Ellington specifically wrote this part for him. The clarinet saxophone player that does the gliss going up to the note, a la Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. That's something that back in this time there were very few people that could do that, but this guy could do it. So it's like, well, we're going to highlight him. And then of course Billie Holiday. This particular piece was where she really kind of was first discovered in a lot of ways. And you see a lot of this in the 30s, a lot of the tunes that he's well known for: Sophisticated Lady, It Don't Mean a Thing, In a Sentimental Mood. Symphony in Black was 1935, and then Caravan in 37. So after he left the Cotton Club and was kind of traveling the country, kind of the next big thing in his life was he became acquainted with Billy Strayhorn. And Billy Strayhorn became Ellington's lifelong companion and just right-hand man. So the two of them started writing music together. And Billy Strayhorn is also a very interesting individual. He originally trained as a classical musician, and he wanted to, as a pianist, and he wanted to write classical music. But since he was African-American, those doors were really shut to him in the 1930s and 40s. So the only real place for him to be producing music was in jazz. So he started writing jazz charts. And he hooked up with Duke Ellington. And of course, Duke Ellington, as we said, has already started this process of changing the sound of what he's doing. And he certainly has kind of his hit tunes that don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing and that kind of thing. But he's also doing things like Symphony in Black. And Billy Strayhorn fell right into that. You know, I love this quote that Billy Strayhorn was my left arm and my right arm, all my eyes in the back of my head, my brain waves in his head, my head, and his and mine. That it just, these two were just fed off of each other. And of course, Billy Strayhorn is the guy that wrote the song that we all know this band for. course, that's Take the A Train. And just for the record, they didn't actually perform while riding a train. It's for the video, but it's a really cool video. The song itself, Take the A Train, refers to the A train of the subway system in New York that runs up to Harlem. That when Billy Strayhorn first came to New York to visit Duke Ellington at his apartment, that was the first line of the directions to get to Duke Ellington's apartment, was Take the A Train. And so Strayhorn turned that into a song that became the official song of the Duke Ellington Band. So in addition to songs like that, they also continued on with this idea of this combination of jazz idioms, but then also a lot of like classical influence. And with Strayhorn, this just got amplified even more. And probably the best example of this would be the next kind of big piece like Symphony in Black, Black, Brown, and Beige, which was that Ellington called tone poem to the American Negro. And when you think tone poem, if you know classical music, tone poems are really associated with like Richard Strauss, that would write tone poems, and Franz Liszt, and a lot of these big Germanic composers. And the idea of a tone poem is that you're telling a story in music. And in this case, I mean, there's a quote here. We thought we wouldn't play it in its entirety tonight because it represents an awfully long and important story, and that I don't think too many people are familiar with the story. This is the one we dedicate to the 700 Negroes who came from Haiti to save Savannah during the Revolutionary War. So it's a very heavy topic. It's a very, again, racially motivated topic, and it's absolutely gorgeous. There's a song from it, from the Fourth Amendment, and I'll play the beginning of a little bit, and then I'll play the song from the fourth section of it called "Come Sunday," and Ellington has said before that he thought that it's the most beautiful thing that he ever wrote, and it became the inspiration for his sacred concerts. So I'll play a little bit of the beginning of this, and then I'll play "Come Sunday." So you can already hear just the difference in sound. Even we can hear Strayhorn's influence, that we're hearing more of that kind of classical sound. And here is the "Come Sunday." It's performed by Mahalia Jackson, who just absolutely destroys it. It's amazing, and became the big hit from this piece.
humanity, God above, please look down and see my people through. I believe the sun and moon will shine up in the sky when the day is gray. I know it, clouds passing by. He'll give peace and comfort to every troubled mind. Come Sunday, oh, come Sunday, that's the day.
Just absolutely beautiful writing, just absolutely stunning. And it was this recording that was made in 1958. It was reworked and recorded. This is the recording that the two people who were the reverends at the Grace Cathedral, John Yaryan and Julian Bartlett, heard, and they were they wanted to present a concert kind of in dedication to the cathedral, which had just opened, and they both wrote letters to Duke Ellington asking him to come and perform. Initially, he refused, and the reason behind it is he said that, quote, "When you get that kind of invitation, you're not in show business. You think to yourself, it has to be kind of right. You have to go out there and make a noise that tells the truth," end quote. Or no. And then he goes on to say, "I had to stop and figure out my eligibility." And this is something that really permeates this particular project, these sacred concerts. You know, we said earlier that Ellington did not live what many people, especially in the 1960s, would consider a really godly life. You know, that he grew up in nightclubs and pool halls, and he was like I said, he drank, he smoked, he fornicated, he did all the things that a lot of people wouldn't associate with somebody who would be invited to a cathedral to perform music like this. And he put a lot of thought to it. And eventually he was reminded of the story of a man who was criticized for juggling before the statue of the Virgin Mary. The performer replied that he was doing the skill he did best as an offering to God. He later expanded on this topic with the quote you see here: "I believe that no matter how highly skilled a drummer or saxophonist might be, if this is the thing he does best, and he offers it sincerely from the heart in or as an accompaniment to his worship, he will not be unacceptable because of lack of skill or of the instrument upon which he makes his demonstration, be it pipe or tom-tom." And I think that's an exceptionally powerful statement. And I think that it really sums up what this particular thing was. And remember, we talked earlier that he didn't want it to be a jazz mass because he felt that a mass was very kind of limited in scope of who it was speaking to. That these are sacred concerts, that it's so that everyone can be a part of it. I mean, in these concerts, Ellington had a message to deliver, and he didn't want to alienate any potential listeners. Ellington's fan base included longstanding jazz aficionados, casual pop music lovers, some who simply enjoyed hearing his colorful stage patter. All of these people needed to be represented for Ellington in this sacred music concert, as well as people who had never heard Ellington's band live, but might attend the concert just out of curiosity. He delivers this positive message filled with sentiments about love, hope, freedom, and avoiding references to the, quote, miserable sinners who are going to hell. It's all original lyrics. Sometimes they've been criticized by folks saying that they just sometimes sound kind of hokey, but at the same time, a way to look at it is that he's speaking to all of us. And so you have a real depth of what's going on. And he goes on to say, quote, every man prays in his own language, and there is no language God doesn't understand. So the first concert was on September 16th, 1965 at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. I put here the playlist. All of these are original compositions by Duke Ellington or by Billy Strayhorn. You will see the Lord's Prayer on there, and also Come Sunday, which is on there as well. So I have a little bit of a video that was made during the performance here. Incidentally, that's Johnny Hodges. He's been playing with the Ellington Band since the Cotton Club days. You might have seen him in some of the earlier videos.
No aspirin, no headaches, no sand traps, mud packs, no heroes, no zeros, no naughty, no nice, no applause, no critique, no amateurs, no professionals, no questions, no answers, no singers, no dancers, no nothing. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. No heaven, no earth, no nothing. Just one, ain't but the one, good Lord above, ain't but the one great God of love.
Yeah, so it's been described as if they took the stage show at the Cotton Club and brought it to the cathedral, and you see a lot of those aspects. And for me, one of the most interesting ones, and I think that really captures to this aspect of anyone is capable of putting forth to the Lord what it is that their talent is that in the show he also invited Bunny Briggs, who at the time was a famous tap dancer, and he invited him to perform on this sacred concert. Here's a video of that.
Thank you very much for Esther Merrill. And now, from Bunny Briggs. You know that Bunny Briggs is the most super leviathanic, rhythmaturgically syncopated tapsthematissionismist.
I just find it fascinating that they had a tap dancer as a part of this, and I think it shows so much Ellington's commitment to this concept of everyone praying in their own way. Let's go to. So the second concert was in January 19th, 1968. The first concert turned out to be not only a wonderful affair for Duke Ellington, but also a sad one as well, that it was the last performance that Billy Strayhorn was able to perform. That soon after the concert, he was diagnosed with cancer and he passed away. And Ellington was crushed, was absolutely crushed by it. And so in the second concert, he needed someone else to kind of focus the energy that, originally was Billy Strayhorn and Billy Strayhorn's contribution to the concert. And so he turned to a Swedish singer named Alice Babs. He had worked with Alice Babs prior in Duke Ellington in Stockholm album, and Alice Babs is just a tremendous talent, an amazing singer. You'll hear in a second. This concert was recorded, was originally premiered at St. John the Divine in 1968, January 19th, and then they went and recorded it on January 22nd, February 19th at Fine Studios in New York. And they again performed it, the same show later that year at Emmanuel Episcopal Church in Boston. And it's all new compositions from the first show. Nothing held over from the first show. And this is the one most people know. This recording that they made on January 22nd and 19th are the ones that are February 19th, are the ones that people mostly hear. And so these might sound a little more familiar if you know these at all. They also have some tremendous videos of this as well, unlike the other ones. So the hardest part about this whole project was trying to pick which videos to actually play from this, because they're all so wondering. So my favorite tune of this one is Almighty God, and you'll hear Alice Babs in this.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Alice Babs.
Almighty God has those angels of way out there above. Up there weaving sparkling fabrics wash your face and hands and heart and soul, 'cause you wash so well. God will keep you safely where there's no sulfur smell. Almighty God has those angels as ready as can be, waiting to dress, caress, and bless us all in perpetuity.
The second time we'll move on, but you could hear just an unbelievable singer. And actually, when they went on tour, and they would do tunes from the Sacred Concert when they were on tour, and Alice Babs couldn't always join them because she had her own professional commitments and she had a family back in Sweden. They actually had to hire 3 different singers to replace her to be able to do all the different things that she was able to do. So in 1973, Duke Ellington was diagnosed with cancer in both of his lungs, and he didn't share the news publicly. But by the time of the third sacred concert at Westminster Abbey, his health was definitely failing. Preparations for the concert were, needless to say, they were exhausting and they were also troublesome. Band had rehearsed some of the music at an after-hours club in a Chicago nightclub where they happened to be touring, called Mr. Kelly's, while the choir for Westminster rehearsed in London with Ellington's choral director Roscoe Ellis. But Ellington just continued like he did to tinker with the music, so he was even changing things right up until pretty much the start of the concert. Reportedly, Ellington stayed up for over 48 hours straight editing and rewriting music, which would be difficult for anybody, but for a 74-year-old who was diagnosed with cancer, it was especially grueling. And then the band took the red eye to London, landing there the day before the concert. They went right into rehearsal. That Ellington was swamped by photographers, and eventually he was like, listen, I can either sit here and pose for pictures or I can go play a concert. It's your choice. Tenor saxophonist Paul Gonsalves had an epileptic seizure on the day of the concert and was taken to the hospital. So Ellington was forced to give his solos to Harold Ashby and brought in another tenor saxophonist, Percy Marion, to play his written parts. And on top of all that, Alice Babs had flown in from Sweden and had to learn all of her songs just hours before taking the stage. The Mercer Ellington, who was Duke Ellington's son, said that he went backstage to check on his dad. He was lying on the cot, barely breathing, looking very tired, exhausted old man. And from the way he was breathing, I began to worry. However, at that moment, someone came to the dressing room and announced the arrival of Princess Margaret. And Ellington sprung to his feet, put on his tails, and escorted the princess to his seat. So this concert was obviously, it received a great deal of press. Unfortunately, Ellington was just not up to promoting it the same. And that after the show, even there was a dinner in his honor at 10 Downing Street, and he showed up and he stayed there for 15 minutes, and he was just like said that he had to go. So there is a recording of this one, but you don't have the same video, you don't have any videos of it like we do of the second concert. And this was followed by kind of an ad hoc concert that happened in Barcelona, kind of like it was a booking error that Ellington didn't know he had to do until the last minute. And supposedly he called up Alice Babs and was like, "Alice, I'm in trouble. You've got to come help me out and sing this thing." So she ended up doing it, and that ended up being the last concert that Duke Ellington did with these. And then he performed one more sacred concert, actually, a small one on December 23rd, 1973 at St. Augustine Presbyterian Church in Harlem. There's no recording of this that survives, and there's not much about the performance that we know, although we do know that Alice Babs wasn't actually there as part of it. Ellington's health, unfortunately, worsened after returning to the US, and several non-sacred concerts in early 1974 were canceled. His final appearance was with the band, took place in Sturgis, Michigan on March 22nd. Ellis was admitted to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital in New York on March 25th, and he would spend the final 2 months of his life there. He continued to work on his music, but he finally succumbed to cancer on May 24th, 1974. So I think it's very poetic that the last major project that he did in his life were these sacred concerts. And he was in a position, not only by the death of Billy Strayhorn, but also by his own mortality. That when he was doing the last of these sacred concerts, he was dying. And for me, that just puts a really good kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of epitaph on his career. So we talked at the beginning about this term beyond category. And I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts. We have some time here, about 20 minutes before I have to jump off, of what you kind of hear in this music that you would say, is it jazz? Is it classical? Is it sacred music? What is it? And you just feel free to chime in, or if you have any other questions at all, we will open the floor to any and all, and I'll do my best to answer them.
And just to let everyone know, you can, I did mute everyone, but if you have a comment or question, you can certainly unmute yourself. There's also the option typically next to your name where you can raise your hand, and that will then take you up to the top of the list. And I'll also keep an eye out if I see hands to help out with art.
Come on, I'm a college teacher. I'm going to start calling on people if you don't ask questions.
You should give a test.
Yeah, there'll be an exam.
I did have a question. I don't know if it fits into the beyond category.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering about sort of I suppose it would be considered the dialogue partners beyond sort of his group. Like, I was thinking about the fact that Love Supreme shows up, is published in 1965, that same year. And is there any kind of inspiration one way or the other? And then I guess the other question I had was, given the interactions with Mahalia Jackson and her role in the civil rights movement,
Mhm.
was he kind of interacting with the social, and so what does this say about kind of maybe broader social movements, things, kinds of stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, as far as Love Supreme, ironically, when you asked me to do this lecture, I was debating between doing these sacred concerts and doing a lecture on Love Supreme. That I love that album. So for those of you who don't know, it's a John Coltrane album, and it's his tribute to God as well. I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure they were both aware of each other, but they were very much in different circles in terms of that. And I've never read anything that say one inspired the other. I think that it's really cool that they both were coming out about the same time. And it also is very, two men, especially Coltrane, that was facing his mortality too, around that same time. He was also getting really sick. So it's a powerful, powerful album. Yeah, Mahalia Jackson, Ellington, it's very interesting. I think that Ellington definitely did a lot to promote his race. I think he did a lot to, you look at the Symphony in Black and Black, Brown, and Beige, and a lot of these things that he did where he was very interested in documenting Negro life and that. But you had this real push in especially the 40s and the 50s where kind of the up and coming at the time would be bebop musicians, um, Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, especially some of these other guys, Miles Davis, who of course originally went on and did his own thing, that really looked at Louis Armstrong. Remember, Louis Armstrong was still doing his thing too at this time, and Duke Ellington and some of these older guys from the 30s and 20s as not being, to use a modern term, woke, to not that they were not promoting their race as they thought that they should. And it wasn't until later that I think that people look back and said, wow, that these people like Louis Armstrong, like Duke Ellington, did so much for their race in their own way. And Duke Ellington too, he'd kind of fallen a little bit out of favor, and the band wasn't doing well. And then there was a very famous performance in 1958, which of course is right around with Black, Brown, and Beige. I think they performed it there actually at the Monterey Jazz Festival, that people just went insane for, and they heard Black, Brown, and Beige and thought it was just a tremendous work of art. So you have this kind of arch in his career where he was kind of losing popularity, and then that really kind of launched him. And it was soon thereafter that he got opportunities like this. But he was not of the generation where he was really outspoken, I think, about the civil rights movement. But I think he always was promoting his race and helping his people as best he could, is the impression that I got. Anyone else?
Cheryl, did you have something you wanted to ask or say?
Cheryl?
Thanks, Jenny. I was curious about that, something you said at the beginning about stride piano style. I'm not familiar with that.
Stride piano it's like people like James P. Johnson, Willie the Lion Smith. It was very popular in Harlem right around the 1920s, especially. Fats Waller was a big one. And what they would do is the playing was really, really technical. And they would compete with each other. They would have what they called cutting contests. And they would have, in Harlem at this time, they would have rent parties, which means you would throw a party in your apartment and you would invite like a couple of stride pianists to come, and you would serve, a lot of illegal whiskey, and you would charge a couple of dollars to get in, and that would be how you paid your rent every month, were these parties. And so these stride pianists would show up and they would play these competitions where basically one person would play a tune and the next person would take it and then make it harder, and the next person would make it harder, and then they go back and forth until someone gave up. And so it's this real technical. It's kind of known the left hand that's in the bass is going back and forth, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. But if you want to look up on YouTube, like Willie the Lion Smith, James P. Johnson, who also incidentally wrote the tune "The Charleston," which was popular around this time, bum 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 bum, the dance. That they were kind of the first they were kind of the precursor in a lot of ways to the big bands kind of taking over and swing taking over in Harlem at this time. And probably the most famous one is Fats Waller, who he wrote just a tremendous amount of music in his career. Ain't Misbehavin', yeah, da, 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 is his song. But yeah, really, it's a really fun music, and it's what these people could do on the piano is just unbelievable.
Does anybody do it now?
You definitely hear like people that'll do throwback stuff. I mean, that there's some videos and things like when I do the jazz history class, there's some modern pianists that'll like play like in a stride style. And I think that definitely it, you hear a lot of influence of it. I mean, I hear a lot of stride influence in like say Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, kind of the left hand, because that's what the name stride comes from, is the left hand going back and forth. So I think that it's a style that I don't think many people do it anymore, and certainly it's not in the style of what jazz piano is now, but it had a huge influence on jazz. And even looking ahead to like bebop, which was kind of the next wave that came after swing in the 40s, that whole idea of the technique just being just unbelievable technique, I think is a real throwback to the stride players. Anyone else?
I noted that Duke Ellington was born the same year as Reverend Thomas Dorsey.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, who took a different track, who was a blues musician and evidently quite successful at it, and then began pushing the envelope with gospel music. And of course, the influence and a strong connection with Mahalia Jackson. I had not heard that performance with Duke Ellington before.
Yeah, I recommend going and listening to the whole. I cut it about halfway off just to save some time to talk at the end. But it's a powerful piece. It's an absolutely powerful piece. And then when it's performed in the sacred concerts, it's not Mahalia Jackson that performs it, but I read somewhere that Duke Ellington made whoever was performing it listen to Mahalia Jackson sing it and say, "I want it exactly like this, or as close as you can." So I do think it's just one of the most powerful things. And for me too, again, it just, of course, there's a long tradition in jazz music, or shall I say, it's in the DNA of jazz music, this idea of the African American church. So it's not unknown, certainly, but this idea of praying in your manner and the way that suits who you are, that was so powerful for Ellington, and to have in that piece that tone poem that he wrote about African American life, to have that in there, I think is just very poignant and powerful.
That Tom Dorsey hymn, which I think is in our hymnal, it's pretty well known, was the one he sang at Martin Luther King's, or he didn't, I don't know if he sang it, but the hymn itself, it was sung at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral.
Oh, wow.
One of the songs I remember. And he came up with the song on the way home from a concert when he'd heard that his son had died as a baby.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the title of it, but it's a very familiar one.
Precious Lord, take my hand, or it's verse, or take my hand, precious Lord.
Make
yes.
You cry when you hear it.
Yes, because he received no news while he was at a meeting, a revival meeting, I believe, as he referred to it, where his telegram simply said, "Your wife is dead. Your wife has died. Come home." And then, as he put it, he buried the baby in the same casket, and he was beside himself. And then he described how the music flew like, or came to him like water out of the crevice of a rock. And of course, as you pointed out, Terry, Mahalia Jackson sang that song, I believe, at Martin Luther King's funeral. It was interesting to me that Duke Ellington, I forget the person's name, but his right arm,
Billy Strayhorn,
because of bias, could not play classical music. That venue was that was not open to him. And Thomas Dorsey got pushed in the other direction. There was some resistance to him within church culture to the gospel music, where he was bringing elements of blues in. And of course, I'm thankful he persevered, because I've been a recipient of the gifts of gospel music. But it was interesting to me that they literally were born the same year and their careers overlapped.
Well, I don't know if I know, I didn't play a ton of from the sacred concerts, but if you go back and watch it, there's a gospel choir. That there are pieces in there, part of it with a gospel choir. There are pieces in there for like the church choir, that he combined all of these different elements. So gospel was a big part of what Ellington was putting into those concerts as well.
Amazing.
It almost feels like a musical collage.
Absolutely, it's a good way to put it. And that, again, just to kind of reiterate the point, that's exactly what he wanted. That he didn't want a jazz mass, of which there are some out there, and there were some then as well. He wanted something that was much more inclusive. That inclusivity was a very big thing for him with these concerts, because everyone in his mind deserves grace.
And I love that you brought to our awareness, Art. I wasn't even aware previously that Duke provided these spiritual concerts, and it makes me connect to jazz music so much more now.
Oh, good.
I mean,
well,
my body just wanted to move in prayer when I was listening to that stuff. It was beautiful.
It is. It's gorgeous, and it definitely has the elements of jazz, and it brings in so much of the jazz, but he also brings in so many other things. And again, this kind of goes with the idea of beyond category, that he's definitely, I mean, he wrote Take the A Train, I mean, can't get more jazz than that. But at the same time, he transcended that. Another thing that he did, you might want to check out, is that he rewrote the Nutcracker Suite, Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, in a jazz style. And there's an amazing video of it, of the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra, like a modern jazz band with Wynton Marsalis leading it. So bum, bum, yadum, weed up,
wow.
It's amazing. And it was Billy Strayhorn who orchestrated it along with Duke Ellington. And it's absolutely incredible. He also did the Peter Gent Suite. So he was doing all these things in the 60s where he was kind of taking classical music too and playing around with it in this jazz style. But the interesting thing, unlike that, with the sacred concerts, is that the sacred concerts is all original music, but he still kind of wrote it in that same classical jazz style that promotes soloists in a manner that a jazz ensemble would, but also would have like very traditional classical choirs, gospel choirs, all that.
We need to have you back.
Anytime. I can talk about all sorts of stuff. I don't know. Maybe we could talk about Love Supreme sometime. That's another beautiful album. Very different, kind of more internal album, I would say, than this. This being more external. That Love Supreme is more of a self-expression for himself. But yeah, this is wonderful. It's a lot of fun, and I encourage you to if you have any other questions. Or if you can always, of course, bug Elise and tell her to talk, ask me. But if you want to email me or anything of that, Christian knows how to get a hold of me, and I'll answer them. But yeah.
Do you have time for one more question? I think Paige, looks like Paige had a question.
I was just going to say that I think the one influence that hasn't been mentioned that I've heard is ragtime. I mean, I hear a strong, especially in the lower registers in his earlier work, there's definitely a strong, like Joplin-esque kind of influence to what he's doing. It's almost like he was the piece between that and more bebop style.
Well, ragtime is it's in the DNA of jazz. That if you look at kind of the way jazz is formed, and you want to like think of it as like a petri dish, you have ragtime, you have the blues, and you have the African American church, or what probably would become what we were thinking of as gospel. And all three of those kind of meld especially in New Orleans in the early 20th century with like Jelly Roll Morton and King Bolton and stuff like that. So you're absolutely right. You're hearing some ragtime in that because ragtime is in the DNA of all jazz, and so that's a big part of it. In fact, we talked about stride piano. That whole thing about the left hand going back and forth, doing bum 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 bum, that is direct from ragtime. That if you listen to any Scott Joplin, he's doing the exact same thing. And so all that stride piano is basically ragtime with about 18 cups of espresso. That it just becomes that. And then of course that does translate into it. But you're exactly right that you're going to hear ragtime. You're going to hear a lot of the blues. I mean, especially you listen to that song Come Sunday. I mean, you hear the blues in there quite distinctly. And then of course the African American church. I mean, this whole thing is based on the concept of music and worship and also dance and worship that is carried over from African slaves when they come to this country as slaves, and then when they were kind of brought into the Christian church through missionaries, you know, they were not allowed into white churches, so they formed their own churches. They formed their own Christian congregations, and they had a number of that African tradition that came along with it. And that's why we have things like gospel. And that's why we have that influence that then went on and people started to imitate on their instruments. And that became the basis of jazz, along with the syncopation of ragtime. So
I often heard that the invention of jazz was because a lot of the Black people lived close to railroads and factories, and the cadence of the machines that would go ka-dunk, ka-dunk, ka-dunk gave them the idea of the quick beat of the jazz music. Because they
along those lines, I don't know if
live in those areas of the city.
Yeah,
it was kind of how they invented the beat of jazz.
Well, if you listen to like African West drumming, you hear what I would interpret, if you want to interpret it this way, as what became swing. You hear that kind of rhythm. And you do have a rhythmical element because what you had was these work songs. You had work songs from the plantations when they were slaves. And then that was carried on even more with the chain gangs. And you have this like ho em a ho, ho em a ho. You turn around and a hoe in the ground. And so they would be working along with the songs. So you did have this very rhythmical beat that went along with it. And a lot of that was working on the railroads. I mean, those chain gangs were building the railroads. But yeah, the rhythmical influence is something that I think originally came from Africa and got just incorporated into the culture. And that's why, it's kind of sum up, I got to run here in a minute. Unfortunately, I got another Zoom thing, but this is why jazz to me is the ultimate musical American art form, because it represents America, good and bad. That it represents America as innovation and freedom and a melting pot. I mean, it truly is a melting pot of all these different ideas coming over the world. But it also was born in slavery. And it was born in abject poverty. And it kind of became what it was. I mean, you know, he talked about that jazz grew where they could play it in brothels and in nightclubs. That's because they weren't allowed to do it anywhere else. So you have this thing where this beautiful, beautiful art form in a lot of ways was formed out of something kind of ugly. So this idea, this really systemic racism and classism in America, but something really beautiful came out of it. And that to me is what makes this art form so spectacular to study, and that it's like an onion. And every time I kind of look at something like Duke Ellington, and Christian, you asked the question about him and civil rights, man, that's a big one to unpack. I mean, that there's a lot going on there. And especially from a man that came from, you know, the 19th century all the way up through the 1970s and what his take on it was. So Anyway,
All right.
I do have to go.
Yeah, I want to respect your time and just simply want to say thank you so much.
My pleasure.
A very engaging, very interesting talk. And of course, if you need to hop off, I just want to make a brief comment to folks.
Yeah,
But
I'm going to
Art,
go. Thank you, everybody.
yes, thank you. It was marvelous.
Again.
And just want to let everyone know we will have this our Faith and Humanities Forum typically happens in the fall. This spring we have 2 more events coming, one in March and one in April. March, let me just check my dates here. March 18th, we will have Chris Gertz, who is a historian who will be presenting on a recent biography he's completed of Charles Lindbergh. And then we have another one on April 15th, which will feature Doug Hoverson, who will talk about the spiritual legacy of beer brewing. So we're going to get a chance to hear about sort of the material culture and how that has affected and been affected by a certain kind of
Let's
spiritual.
hope by then they have samples that they can give us and the pandemic will be over and we can be there to sample the brewing of the beer.
I'm going to leave that up to you, Terry. You got to have that at home. Anyway, thank you all so much. It was marvelous to see you all, and I hope that you stay warm and enjoy time with family and friends. And we'll look forward to being in touch sooner rather than later. Thank you.